Hey, everybody, how's it going? We've got ourselves some, I'm going to call it good news overall. I'm definitely going to go ahead and call it good news with the Seattle Seahawks. First of all, after a few days of genuine concern that the Seahawks were going to be left out in the cold when it came to these defensive coaching hires, we no longer have to worry about that. We no longer have to worry about coming away with nothing but Clint Hurtt and Carl Scott. Sean Desai has indeed decided to come to Seattle, and we may have sweetened the pot a little bit for him to make sure that he chose Seattle over Minnesota. So, if we did indeed decide to do that, then good on this organization for not just sitting back and hoping. So, Ian Rappaport has the tweet. The Seahawks are hiring former Bears DC Sean Desai as their associate head coach dash defense. Of course, with a lean towards defense because that's where Desai has built his experience. At 38 years old, Desai is one of the youngest associate head coaches in the NFL. Pete Carroll made a hard sell as he retooled his defensive staff, and Desai lands in Seattle. So we're not bringing on Desai as a secondary coach. We're not bringing him on as a defensive consultant or unspecified defensive assistant. He is coming on as the associate head coach. And based off my research, it looks like associate head coach is considered above even the assistant head coach in terms of how much control and how much power they have and how much they do. So I don't know if that's a recent development with the job that was offered Desai, but if it is, then I have to commend this organization for going out to make sure they landed their man after they lost Donatel, and it looked like Desai might choose Minnesota over Seattle. So Sean Desai is now your associate head coach, defense, in Seattle. I think this is something that could drastically change this defense if he is allowed to do his work. And given the fact that the Seahawks were going after so many Fangio guys this offseason, obviously Donatel was in the building for a few days, and now Desai, it seems likely that there's going to be some impact from these signings. These are not just yes men. I do have some reason to be encouraged. So hopefully, when the season starts, we'll actually see some meaning here. But I think bringing in Desai is a great move. Desai is a guy who might even be on a future head coach track at this point. So exciting. And that's not the only thing that has happened this morning. We also have some word on the offensive line coach position. We've had a firing and a promotion, and this one is a little more polarizing. But nevertheless, let's try to break it down a little bit here. So the Seattle Seahawks have fired their offensive line coach, Mike Solari. Now, before I get into who we promoted, let me just say this about Solari. He was pretty good. I don't think he was amazing. He wasn't great. He was pretty good, though. Granted, Tom Cable was an easy act to follow, but when Solari showed up, we had a decent chunk of players start to play better. We had the offensive line in general start to play better as a unit. The last two Tom Cable years were abysmal. And when Solari got in there, immediately things got a lot better. I remember Affetti started playing better under Solari. I believe that when we got J.R. Sweezy back, he looked better than he did when we had Tom Cable. And he also helped, I think, get Dwayne Brown back to the all-pro level because the first year Dwayne Brown was here, he really wasn't playing that well. And I think that Tom Cable had a lot to do with that. And you definitely saw Solari do some things pretty well. However, Solari was a guy who you brought in along with Brian Schottenheimer. And Schottenheimer wanted things to be a certain way on that offensive line because he was more of a power running. So When you bring in Shane Waldron, who's a little more of an outside zone guy, it changes the equation a little bit. And it seems to me that the Seahawks are kind of going all in on the Shane Waldron offense. And in order to do that, they need to move off Solari and bring in an offensive line coach who might be a little more in tune with what Waldron's trying to do. So on that level, it's a good thing because it also indicates that we are going to turn the page on the offensive line this offseason. You are going to see us get some new offensive linemen in here who are a little more in tune with what Waldron is doing. And leaning into that would be the person we have promoted. Andy Dickerson, who we hired from the Rams along with Shane Waldron last offseason, has been promoted to offensive line coach. So he's been bumped up from run game coordinator to offensive line coach. And given the fact that those guys were together in LA, I think that makes sense. So, yay. And that basically runs down the news of this morning, but this is some pretty significant news. The Andy Dickerson thing, some people are going to be wary about that because the offensive line in 2021 seemed to take a little bit of a step back, especially as the season went on. And some people thought that the Andy Dickerson addition may have been the culprit behind that. And that's definitely possible. There was probably a lot of mismatching between somebody like a Solari, who was hired along with Schottenheimer, and Dickerson, who was hired along with Waldron. But maybe getting one of those guys out and letting one guy be the one in control is going to help. And if you are going to keep Waldron, then I think it makes sense to lean into that. And as for his previous work as our run game coordinator last year, it took a while. Don't get me wrong. It definitely took a while. But the run game definitely started to figure things out by the end of the season last year. So if they can build on that, then that's a feather in the cap of Andy Dickerson's ability to coordinate that run game. And if he's given more power to control the offensive line, then maybe we can get some more mobile offensive linemen in here and start to really do the things that Shane Waldron probably wants to do with this running game. So I like this from the sense that we are going to go all out in making Waldron's offense work by giving him an offensive line coach that is probably more in tune with his needs. But Solari was good. And this is not a Tom Cable thing. Like I said, this is not a Tom Cable thing where he's just awful and thank God he's out. No. Solari's good and he'll probably be good wherever he goes next. But I think the thinking here is that he's just not... He's not what we need with this new offense. And we tried to make it work for a year. The results were pretty mixed. Leaning towards bad, honestly. And hopefully we will see better things with Dickerson, who was with Shane Waldron for several years in LA and now here. So that's the roundup. Sean Desai is in Seattle. Breathe a sigh of relief. And we've turned the page on the offensive line coach, which hopefully means we're going to turn the page on the offensive line a little bit. All right. I will see you guys later today. Go Hawks. Let me know what you guys think down below. I think overall this is good news. I'm happy about this.